The summer heat in Pinecrest County had always been unforgiving, but that day it felt particularly oppressive. The annual Sheriff's Department barbecue sprawled across Sheriff Wade Blackwood's expansive ranch property, an event that had become something of a local tradition over his 15 years as the county's top lawman. Deputies and their families gathered under the enormous oak trees, seeking refuge from the relentless Texas sun as smoke from the grills carried the scent of brisket and ribs across the grounds. Sheriff Blackwood moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight, his weathered face creasing with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. At 54, Wade commanded respect without having to ask for it. His imposing 6'3" frame and the perfectly pressed uniform he wore even on his day off ensured that everyone remembered exactly who was in charge. One of the newer deputies whispered to his wife when Wade approached, straightening his posture instinctively. Wade pretended not to notice the effect he had on people. He enjoyed it too much to acknowledge it directly. From across the yard, Wade spotted Deputy Carson Miller manning the grill, laughing easily with the other men. At 29, Carson was well-liked among his colleagues, hard-working, honest, and showing real promise in the department. Wade had taken a special interest in the young deputy's career, something he made sure everyone knew was a sign of his generosity. But it wasn't Carson who caught Wade's attention that day. It was his wife, Emma. Emma Miller stood by the drinks table, her chestnut hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, her sundress moving gently in the hot breeze. At 27, she had the kind of beauty that was effortless, natural in a way that made the heavily made-up wives of the other deputies seem like they were trying too hard. Wade had always noticed her, of course. He noticed everything in his county. But today, something was different in the way he watched her laugh, the way she moved. Wade approached her at the drinks table. Emma offered him a refill with a genuine smile that lacked the nervous deference the others showed him. He commented on Carson's grilling skills, making a joke about promotion. Emma's laughter carried across the yard, a sound that drew Wade's attention more than it should have. He leaned against the table, deliberately casual as he asked about the challenges of being married to a deputy. Emma admitted to difficulties but expressed pride in Carson's work. Wade's eyes studied her in a way that should have made her uncomfortable but somehow didn't. Carson joined them then, slipping his arm around his wife's waist and greeting the sheriff respectfully. Wade told a smooth lie about Carson's shooting skills at practice, watching with satisfaction as Emma's face lit up with pride. Carson shrugged off the compliment modestly while clearly pleased by the recognition. Wade commented on how fortunate Carson was, his tone light but his eyes calculating as he asked about the length of their marriage. When Emma answered that it had been 4 years, Wade made a remark about young love that carried an undercurrent of something darker. Something in his voice made Emma look at him more carefully, seeing past the authority figure to the man beneath. The late afternoon sun caught his silver hair, the lines of experience etched into his face. Emma made a teasing comment about Wade being a silver fox, a remark that hung in the air for a heartbeat too long. Carson laughed, breaking the sudden tension, but Wade's eyes locked with Emma's for a moment that stretched beyond propriety. Wade made a final comment about Emma's sharp tongue before walking away to greet other guests. Emma felt a strange flutter in her chest then, like she'd just stepped off a cliff and was waiting to fall. She dismissed it quickly, turning her attention back to her husband, to the safety and comfort of the life they'd built. 3 days later, Emma received a text from an unknown number. The sheriff complimented her sundress from the barbecue, signing with his initial. Emma stared at the message for a long time, knowing she should ignore it but ultimately responding with a brief acknowledgement. His immediate reply invited her to call him by his first name. Emma set the phone down, feeling a mixture of confusion and forbidden thrill. She told herself that she was happily married and the sheriff was old enough to be her father. This was nothing, she reasoned, just friendliness from Carson's mentor. A week later, Wade began texting her regularly. First about department schedules, then about Carson's performance review. Each message seemed to require a response, and each exchange stretched a little longer than the last. One evening while Carson worked the night shift, Wade messaged about the pressures of the job and how Emma understood what others couldn't see. When Emma questioned this assessment, he complimented her perceptiveness, telling her she was different from everyone else in town. The attention from someone like Wade, powerful, experienced, respected, was intoxicating in a way Emma hadn't expected. She justified the ongoing communication as harmless, just words on a screen. Yet she deleted the messages each night before Carson came home, a behavior that contradicted her claims of innocence even to herself. 2 weeks after the barbecue, Wade suggested meeting for coffee to discuss a surprise anniversary party for Carson. Emma agreed without hesitation, telling herself it was a thoughtful gesture, that she was lucky Carson had such a supportive boss. They arranged to meet at a diner just outside Pinecrest, where the truckers stopped on their way through town. No department personnel ever ate there. Wade waited for her, not in uniform but in jeans and a button-down shirt that made him look different, less intimidating but somehow more compelling. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy. His hand brushed against hers as she sat down, a touch so brief she could almost believe she'd imagined it. Almost. The first meeting at the Starlight Motel in Everett County happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Emma told Carson she was attending a teachers' conference in the neighboring district. Wade selected the location carefully, 40 miles from Pinecrest, a place where no one would recognize the sheriff's black SUV parked outside room 114. Emma sat in her car for 15 minutes before finding the courage to walk to the door. The nausea in her stomach competed with the electric anticipation coursing through her veins. She knocked twice, then a third time, the prearranged signal. Wade opened the door without a word. The room smelled of artificial pine and fresh sheets. Wade had arrived early, removed the garish motel artwork, and placed a small bouquet of roses on the dresser. A bottle of champagne sat in an ice bucket. This moment had been building for weeks since their coffee meeting, through increasingly intimate texts and a second lunch where his hand had rested on her knee under the table. Neither spoke of Carson during these encounters. The young deputy existed in another reality, one they temporarily stepped out of when together. Afterward, Wade presented Emma with a small blue box containing a white gold bracelet with a teardrop sapphire. The jewelry was worth more than Carson made in a month. Emma protested, but Wade clasped it around her wrist anyway, telling her she deserved beautiful things. She removed it before driving home, tucking it into a hidden pocket in her purse where it would later be transferred to a showbox of mementos at the back of her closet. The first of many secrets. At home, Carson greeted her with a quick kiss and questions about the conference. Emma recited the lies she had rehearsed, surprised at how easily they flowed. Carson listened while reheating leftovers in their small kitchen. The modest 2-bedroom ranch house they'd purchased 3 years ago suddenly seemed shabby compared to the luxury Wade had described. His lake house, his trips to Europe, the privileges his position afforded him. Carson talked about his day, a simple story about helping an elderly man change a flat tire. His earnest pride in this small kindness made Emma's stomach tighten with something between guilt and resentment. The days fell into a pattern. Emma taught her third graders while maintaining appearances as Carson's devoted wife. Twice a month, she found reasons to be away from Pinecrest for an afternoon. Wade was insatiable, not just physically but in his need to possess her attention entirely. He sent messages at all hours, expecting immediate responses. He asked what she wore, who she spoke to, how she spent every moment they were apart. Emma felt both special and suffocated by his interest. At the department, Wade began a subtle campaign regarding Carson. He praised the young deputy publicly while assigning him the least desirable shifts. He spoke highly of Carson's dedication while questioning his judgment in private conversations with other officers. The department dynamics shifted imperceptibly. Carson found himself working more nights and weekends, isolated from the camaraderie he once enjoyed with fellow deputies. Wade ensured Carson received just enough positive reinforcement to prevent suspicion while systematically undermining his position. The community was small enough that Emma's behavior didn't go unnoticed. Her friend Sarah, another teacher, commented on Emma's new clothes, items purchased with cash Wade provided, explained away as sale finds. Sarah noted Emma's distraction, her constant checking of her phone, the way she no longer joined their Friday happy hours. Emma dismissed these observations with increasingly elaborate explanations. The lies multiplied, each requiring 3 more to maintain. She stopped calling her parents as often, afraid they would hear something different in her voice. 3 months into the affair, Emma arrived at the motel to find Wade already drinking, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the nightstand. His silver hair was disheveled, his eyes harder than she'd seen before. He questioned her about a male colleague she'd mentioned in passing, demanded to see her phone, checked her text messages while she watched in stunned silence. This wasn't the charming, powerful man who had pursued her so relentlessly. This was someone else, someone calculating and cold. When she tried to leave, Wade grabbed her wrist where the sapphire bracelet usually sat, leaving marks that would yellow into bruises the next day. He apologized immediately, blamed stress, department politics, his growing feelings for her. He said things no one had ever said to Emma before, that she awakened something in him, that he couldn't bear the thought of losing her, that she belonged with him, not Carson. The intensity frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. That night, he was gentler than ever before, and Emma convinced herself the incident was an anomaly, a momentary lapse from a man unaccustomed to vulnerability. A week later, Emma attempted to create distance. She missed their regular Tuesday meeting, claiming illness. Wade sent 37 text messages in 4 hours. He drove past her school twice. That evening, he called Carson into his office for a performance review. Carson returned home quiet and confused, telling Emma that the sheriff had mentioned concerns about his decision-making abilities. Nothing formal, nothing on record, just concerns. Wade texted Emma later that night, "Hope your husband's doing okay. Tough conversation today. Would hate to see his career affected by poor choices." The threat wasn't subtle. Emma understood perfectly what Wade was capable of doing to Carson's career, to their life in Pinecrest. She replied immediately, apologizing for missing their meeting, promising to make it up to him. Wade's response came seconds later, a time and place for their next encounter. Emma stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror that night, a stranger looking back at her. The woman she had been 6 months ago, happy, honest, in love with her husband, seemed like a character in someone else's story. Now she existed in 2 irreconcilable worlds, the increasingly hollow facade of her marriage and the dangerous, intoxicating reality of Wade's obsession. She told herself she could manage both, establish boundaries, protect Carson while extracting herself gradually from Wade's grip. She told herself she was still in control. The bruises on her wrist told a different story. 5 months into the affair, Wade's demands escalated beyond Emma's capacity to accommodate them. The sheriff no longer accepted their twice-monthly meetings. He wanted more time, more control, more of Emma herself. They met at their usual motel, but this time Wade arrived with unexpected news. He had purchased a condo in Austin, a fresh start for both of them. He described the skyline view, the doorman, the security that would keep them safely anonymous in the city. He spoke as if their future together had already been decided. Emma listened in growing horror as Wade explained his plan. She would leave Carson within 2 weeks. Wade had already arranged for a position with the Austin Police Department. His connections went far beyond Pinecrest County. Emma's protests died in her throat as Wade's expression hardened. He reminded her of everything he had done for her, everything he could take away. His voice remained steady while listing the ways he could destroy Carson's career, their reputation, their life in this town. Emma recognized for the first time that this had never been about love or even desire. This was about possession. She had been naive to believe Wade could be satisfied with stolen afternoons and secret messages. He wanted to own her completely. That night in the motel room, Emma pretended to consider his offer while silently acknowledging the truth she had been avoiding for months. The affair needed to end. The risk was no longer just to her marriage but to her safety. Wade's obsession had grown beyond her control. She feigned enthusiasm for his Austin plans, promised to begin preparations, and placated him with assurances that she wanted this too. Wade seemed satisfied, though a coldness lingered in his eyes that suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. The following Tuesday, Emma composed a message she never sent. In it, she explained that the affair was over, that she couldn't leave Carson, that Wade needed to move on. She drafted and deleted it 7 times, each version attempting to find language that wouldn't provoke his rage. In the end, she decided a face-to-face conversation would be safer. She would meet him one last time, in public, and end things where his reaction would be constrained by witnesses. Before Emma could execute this plan, Wade made an unexpected move. He called Carson into his office on Thursday morning and assigned him to an overnight surveillance detail, effective immediately. Then he texted Emma that he would be coming to her house that evening to continue their conversation about Austin. Emma's desperate reply that Carson might come home went unanswered. The school day passed in a fog of anxiety. She considered staying at Sarah's house, claiming a sudden illness, but feared this would only delay the inevitable confrontation. Wade had become unpredictable, dangerous in his certainty that Emma belonged to him. At 6:30 that evening, Wade's black SUV pulled into the Miller's driveway. Emma met him at the door, refusing to let him inside, insisting they talk on the porch. Wade dismissed her concerns about Carson returning. He had personally assigned the deputy to a location 40 miles away, watching an empty warehouse until morning. There would be no interruptions. When Emma continued to resist, Wade simply pushed past her into the house, bringing with him a bottle of expensive wine and the suffocating confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. The conversation that followed was less a discussion than an ultimatum. Wade had already packed a bag for her, waiting in his vehicle. They would drive to Austin tonight. Carson would receive divorce papers next week. Everything had been arranged. Emma's protests grew increasingly desperate as Wade poured wine she wouldn't drink and described their new life with the detached precision of someone who had planned every detail. When Emma finally gathered the courage to say no definitively, Wade's mask slipped completely. The transformation from charismatic lawman to cold-eyed predator happened in an instant. Wade cornered Emma in her own bedroom, his hand tight around her wrist as she tried to reach her phone. His words became explicit threats, not just against Carson's career now, but against him personally. Wade knew people who could make accidents happen. He had been protecting enemies for decades. No one would question the sheriff's version of events, especially regarding a deputy who had been increasingly unstable, according to department records Wade himself had fabricated. Emma never saw Carson enter the house. She never heard his key in the lock or his footsteps down the hallway. Her first awareness of her husband's presence was Wade's sudden stillness, his grip loosening as he turned toward the bedroom doorway. Carson stood there, still in uniform, his face expressionless as he took in the scene before him. His wife pressed against the wall, the sheriff's hand on her wrist, the unmistakable intimacy of their confrontation. The silence stretched for 10 eternal seconds. Carson's eyes moved from Wade to Emma, then back to Wade. There was no outburst, no demand for explanation. The deadness in Carson's gaze communicated something far worse than rage, a complete and instantaneous extinguishing of feeling. Without a word, he turned and walked out, his footsteps even and unhurried down the hallway, through the living room, and out the front door. Wade released Emma's wrist. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the sheriff's face. This wasn't part of his carefully constructed plan. Emma pushed past him and ran after Carson, but by the time she reached the driveway, his patrol car was already disappearing down the street. The 48 hours that followed existed in a strange, suspended reality. Carson didn't come home that night. Emma left 27 increasingly desperate voicemails. She called the station, only to be told Deputy Miller had requested personal leave. When Carson finally returned, he moved through their house like a ghost, gathering essential items into a duffel bag without acknowledging Emma's tear-streaked face or broken apologies. Her explanations about Wade's manipulation, her fear, her regret, all met with the same impenetrable silence. Carson's transformation was absolute. The warm, earnest man who had loved Emma completely was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed stranger who looked through her rather than at her. He answered direct questions with single words, slept on the couch when he was home at all, and arranged his schedule to avoid her entirely. At the department, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Wade's initial uncertainty had been replaced by a calculated campaign against Carson, scheduling him for the worst shifts, assigning him to menial tasks, isolating him from the support of fellow deputies. Rumors spread through the small department. Officers who had once been Carson's friends now avoided his gaze in the hallway. Meanwhile, Wade continued to pursue Emma with a new, more public intensity. He appeared at her classroom after school. He parked outside their house at night. When Emma changed her phone number, flowers arrived at the school with notes that made her hands shake. The message was clear. Wade would not be denied what he believed was his. As Carson withdrew further into his silent suffering, Emma realized with growing horror that she was trapped between two unbearable outcomes: the complete destruction of the man she had betrayed or submission to a man whose obsession had no limits. The systematic dismantling of Deputy Carson Miller's career began with small humiliations. Sheriff Blackwood assigned him to direct traffic during the town's annual parade, a task typically given to new cadets. The following week, Carson found himself inventorying expired equipment in the department's storage basement, breathing dust and mold for 12-hour shifts. When a high-profile drug bust occurred, Carson was conspicuously excluded from the team, then criticized in the debriefing for lack of engagement. His personnel file, once exemplary, now contained written warnings for infractions Carson hadn't committed. The dangerous assignments came next. Carson was sent alone to domestic disturbance calls known to involve weapons. He was assigned to patrol the county's most isolated roads during severe weather warnings. Wade arranged schedules ensuring Carson worked without proper backup, placing him repeatedly in harm's way. The sheriff's strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Either Carson would resign, unable to endure the pressure, or an unfortunate incident would remove him permanently. The other deputies witnessed Wade's campaign with uncomfortable silence. Some, like Rodriguez and Tenes, attempted small gestures of solidarity, covering shifts when Carson was clearly exhausted, quietly correcting paperwork errors Wade had engineered. Others aligned themselves firmly with the sheriff, participating in Carson's isolation, understanding that their own careers hung in the balance. The department fractured along invisible lines of loyalty and self-preservation. Through it all, Carson endured with a stoicism that unsettled even Wade. He arrived for each shift 10 minutes early, performed whatever demeaning task was assigned without complaint, and documented everything meticulously. The hollow-eyed deputy never responded to Wade's provocations, never provided the emotional outburst the sheriff could use against him. Carson's silence was his only remaining weapon, and he wielded it with devastating effectiveness. Each day he returned to work was a quiet challenge to Wade's authority. Emma's situation deteriorated in parallel. Wade's fixation intensified beyond obsession into something more dangerous. He appeared in the grocery store while she shopped, describing items in her cart as if they'd planned the meal together. He sent texts detailing what she had worn to school, proving he was watching. Twice, Emma returned home to find evidence someone had been inside. A window left slightly open, her dresser drawers arranged differently than she had left them. Wade never directly admitted to these intrusions, but his subsequent texts referenced items visible only from inside her bedroom. The threatening messages escalated from implied to explicit. Wade described what would happen if Emma tried to leave Pinecrest without him, the accidents that might befall her, the career-ending incidents Carson might experience. These weren't idle threats from a rejected lover. They were promises from a man with the power, connections, and position to fulfill them. Emma began sleeping with her bedroom door barricaded, jumping at unexpected sounds, checking her rearview mirror constantly for Wade's black SUV. 3 weeks after Carson's discovery of the affair, Emma attempted to report Wade's harassment to the Texas Rangers. She drove to their regional office 60 miles away, carrying a carefully documented record of Wade's messages and stalking behavior. The officer who took her statement was professional and sympathetic. 2 hours later, as Emma drove home, Wade called her cell phone. He recited her entire conversation with the ranger, word for word. His voice carried the satisfied tone of a man demonstrating the full extent of his reach. The Rangers never contacted Emma again. Her file disappeared from their system. Emma's breaking point arrived on a rain-soaked Tuesday afternoon at Pinecrest Elementary. A substitute teacher mentioned working at the high school years earlier, when a young English teacher abruptly resigned mid-semester. The substitute recalled rumors of an affair with Sheriff Blackwood, the young woman's subsequent emotional collapse, and her hasty departure from town. The story emerged casually during lunch break, not directed at Emma specifically, but the parallels were impossible to ignore. That evening, Emma began investigating Wade's past with frantic intensity. She contacted former department employees through social media, using a newly created anonymous account. She searched newspaper archives at the county library, looking for patterns in staff changes at various county offices. Each inquiry revealed similar stories: women who had been involved with Wade, then ostracized, discredited, or forced to leave Pinecrest altogether. A courthouse clerk who resigned after inappropriate behavior. A dispatch operator who transferred to another county following a mental health incident. A paralegal who moved away after criminal charges were mysteriously filed, then dropped. The pattern stretched back through Wade's entire career. Most disturbing was the story of Diana Forrester, a deputy's wife from 8 years earlier. Her relationship with Wade followed the same progression: flattery, gifts, secret meetings, then escalating control. When she attempted to end the affair, her husband's patrol car was found abandoned near Sawyer Creek. His body was discovered 3 days later, an apparent suicide. Diana left town within a week, her reputation destroyed by rumors Wade himself had started about her mental instability and infidelity. Emma sat in her living room surrounded by the evidence of Wade's decades-long pattern of predation and abuse of power. Carson was working another overnight shift, alone as usual. The silence of their half-empty home pressed against her as the truth crystallized with terrifying clarity. This would never end. Wade would continue destroying Carson while pursuing her relentlessly. Eventually, Carson would break under the pressure or fall victim to a arranged accident. Emma herself would either submit to Wade's control or become another ruined woman in his wake. There was no escape, no authority higher than Wade in their small corner of Texas. The legal system had already failed her. The realization brought with it a strange calm. If traditional methods of protection were closed to her, other options must be considered. Emma cleared away the scattered papers and photographs, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She opened her laptop and began researching untraceable poisons, their symptoms, availability, and detection methods. She studied Wade's schedule, noting his predictable routines. She calculated how long Carson's shift would last, ensuring adequate time. With methodical precision, Emma planned the only solution remaining to her: an invitation, a carefully prepared meal, and a permanent end to Wade Blackwood's reign of terror. Emma composed the message with careful deliberation, each word selected to convey precisely the right tone: regret, surrender, and just enough hope to be convincing. She told Wade she had been fighting the inevitable, that Carson's emotional withdrawal had made her realize what truly mattered. She suggested dinner at her home on Friday evening. Carson's shift wouldn't end until midnight. They would have hours alone to discuss their future. Wade's response came within minutes, triumphant beneath a veneer of casual acceptance. Of course he would come. He had always known Emma would make the right choice eventually. The following 2 days passed in meticulous preparation. Emma purchased Wade's favorite Cabernet from a liquor store in the next county. She selected the crystal glasses from their wedding gifts, used only for special occasions. The odorless, tasteless powder dissolved completely in the deep red liquid, leaving no visible trace. The house was immaculate, dinner prepared with precision. Wade's preferred rare steak, roasted potatoes, asparagus. Emma chose the blue dress Wade had once admired. The performance required flawless attention to detail. A single envelope lay beside her plate, her confession already written, explaining everything. At precisely 7 o'clock, Wade's SUV pulled into the driveway. Emma opened the door with a carefully practiced smile. Wade entered as if he already owned the house, his confidence restored now that Emma had surrendered to the inevitable. He brought no flowers, no gifts. His presence was offering enough. He surveyed the dining room with satisfaction, noting Emma's efforts to please him. He kept his gun holstered at his side even off-duty. Old habits of control. Their conversation flowed with surprising ease. Emma asked about the Austin condo, expressing enthusiasm for the life she would never live. Wade described the view from the balcony, the secure parking garage, the exclusive building amenities. When she poured the wine, her hand remained steady, her smile unwavering as Wade accepted the glass with the satisfaction of a man who had never doubted the outcome. Wade drank deeply throughout dinner, refilling his own glass twice from the decanter Emma had prepared. By the third glass, his speech slowed fractionally. He loosened his collar, complaining of the room's warmth. Emma maintained her attentive expression while monitoring each successive symptom with clinical detachment. 47 minutes after his first sip, Wade stood abruptly, his face flushed. He staggered slightly, catching himself against the table edge. The paralysis began in his extremities, a numbness he attributed initially to the wine. By the time he recognized something was wrong, his vocal cords had already begun to fail. He reached for his gun with fingers that no longer responded to his commands. His collapse was almost graceful, a slow-motion descent to the kitchen floor where Emma had led him under the pretense of getting water. Emma did not touch him. She simply watched as understanding dawned in his eyes. Sheriff Wade Blackwood, who had terrorized her, threatened Carson, manipulated an entire department, and victimized countless women before her, now lay helpless on her kitchen floor. His mouth worked silently, trying to form words that would never be spoken. The light in his eyes dimmed gradually, then extinguished completely. Carson Miller returned home at 10:17 p.m., nearly 2 hours before his shift should have ended. The captain had sent him home, concerned about his visible exhaustion after weeks of punishing assignments. He noticed Wade's SUV in the driveway but felt nothing beyond a dull recognition. The emotional capacity for surprise or anger had been burned out of him weeks ago. The house was silent as he entered. Candles still burned on the dining table, illuminating 2 place settings, 2 wine glasses, the remnants of a meal for 2. The envelope addressed to him registered peripherally. He continued to the kitchen, drawn by some unexplained instinct. Wade lay on the tile floor, eyes open but empty, body still. Emma sat in a kitchen chair nearby, her posture perfect, hands folded in her lap. She did not speak as Carson knelt beside the sheriff, checking for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there. Carson's police training asserted itself automatically: assess the scene, secure the area, call for backup. But his hand never reached for his phone. Instead, he returned to the dining room and opened the envelope. Emma's confession was comprehensive. The affair, Wade's escalating control and threats, his campaign against Carson, the other women who had suffered before her, the poison carefully administered. The final paragraphs detailed where evidence could be found, absolving Carson of any knowledge or involvement. Emma had crafted his innocence as meticulously as she had planned Wade's death. Carson read the letter twice, then returned to the kitchen. Emma hadn't moved, her eyes fixed on Wade's body. Without speaking, Carson retrieved a dish towel, wiped the wine glass bearing Wade's fingerprints, and placed it in Emma's hands, wrapping her fingers around it. Their eyes met for the first time in weeks. A decision had been made. The Texas Rangers arrived 90 minutes later, responding to Carson's 911 call reporting that he had returned home to find Sheriff Blackwood dead in his kitchen and his wife in a state of shock. The investigation consumed the county for months. Emma's fingerprints on the glass, her documented history of being stalked by Wade, the substantial evidence of the sheriff's pattern of harassment and abuses of power that emerged during the inquiry, all contributed to the eventual ruling: self-defense against an intruder threatening sexual assault. The town of Pinecrest divided along predictable lines. Those who had witnessed Wade's tyranny quietly supported the official conclusion. Others, particularly those whose positions had depended on the sheriff's favor, whispered darker theories. Carson resigned from the department 6 months later. The Millers sold their house and moved north, beyond the reach of lingering suspicions. The truth remained suspended between them, neither acknowledged nor denied. Their marriage continued in a different form, not the innocent love of their early years, but something tempered by shared complicity and the understanding that some choices, once made, alter the landscape of possibility forever. Small compromises had led to unimaginable consequences, lines crossed that could never be uncrossed. In protecting Emma, Carson had preserved what remained of himself. In accepting his protection, Emma acknowledged the debt that could never be repaid.